Aborigine story, starting with why. With her own daughter, she travelled to this place, but she was reminded that her daughter had fallen into this water. Her daughter had died in this place, in this fast-flowing river that tasted of the sea. But this was better than where they had started. This old woman, with her back bent, was still dainty. She would try and hold herself tall and strong and straight, and she loved animals. But people, when they saw her, looked at her as if she was as old as the burnt gum tree that was on the hard, parched earth. She looked at the water, the rough stones that were as tall as a stalk in this rippling river, and it made them rumble from side to side. Her daughter had died in this place, and on the anniversary of that death, on each calm night, she would look up into the sky at that elegant star that blinked like an eye. Every single night, she would stay there and held her daughter's daughter in her arms. Year 6 story, starting with when. On this calm night by the side of the rippling river, she knew that this was the time that her daughter had died. There was an elegant star that blinked at her just like her own daughter when she looked her in the eyes, and every night when that star was in the sky, she would see her. She would remember her daughter. She was a woman who loved animals, but she was old as the burnt gum tree that was here on the hard, parched earth by the side of this river. She was a woman, a dainty woman, who found herself in the finest of clothes. She would try to walk well, but her back was always bent. The rippling river made the rough stones rumble, each stone tall as a stalk, but she knew that she had to clean her soft silk clothes. She would do it, not roughly, but caring for each and every single fibre inside of that place. When her daughter had died, it was her turn to look after her own granddaughter. She would nurture her own daughter's child. Well, it was always a reminder that they had travelled to this place. And her daughter, in that water, it was always a reminder that she was now alone except for this granddaughter strapped to her. She brushed against one of those rough stones and it cut her skin through and the blood dripped down into the water. She remembered how she had heard her daughter flow underneath the water. But with her grandchild in an ancient reed basket, a one that had been within this family for so long, she had to take that child and put it in a sling where she'd kept her own daughter. She remembered times past. She thought of this place, and she looked up, and it was almost as if her own daughter was blinking towards her. She knew that if she were to fish, she might get money so that they would have a better life. But there was something that caught her eye. It glittered and gleamed beneath the water, and all she thought of was treasure. Oh, inside of the water, she was not so back-bent. Her legs were not as stiff, and without thinking about it, she took her clothes, now filled with all of that moss, wrapped it about her shoulder, and leapt into the air. Leapt as she had never leapt before, arms reaching out towards it, but the moss caught upon her legs, caused her to fall into the water. She could feel herself falling and a sound at her chest, and she remembered her granddaughter there in this place. They faded away, but that child was a new life beginning, and you will see her. It cost her life, but you will see them by the side of the water. An animal, long-legged, with one last leap still left inside of its legs, a pouch at its front with a child inside. Many people see it and believe that this is the way that kangaroos came to this place. But if you look by the side of that rippling river, on one of those rough stones that rumble, you'll see a small shard of silk clothing. Year 6, full story, starting with outside leading to initial setting. His short wiry hair stuck up straight from his head, but he looked about him with his ice-cold piercing eyes. He loved this place. It was as if this city had a grip on him. All of the noisy crowds and filled with busy people, the large cars. He loved being like it was in the colony of squirming bees. He would walk down the street and look about him. It would bring a wry smile to his lips. Oh, he was a strong man, and he had tasted all of the foods inside of this city. He loved the smell of the delicious food and the salty taste of fish and chips. He would walk about him. He would look. He would see everything that he possibly could, but he worked hard. He rubbed his deeply cut hands over his dirty vest. He worked hard for the money that he had. If you looked at him, you would not think that this was someone who liked to dance, but he did. Oh, he used his frame and he could move like a fairy in the air. He was helpful. He loved the taste of all kinds of food, from the farthest away, the mildest of curries. And when he had any time at all, he would play at tennis, but he was never one to win. Here he was, stuck in this place, and he bought the food, and he could see a group of homeless young men in a doorway. There was a stench of petrol and a slurry under his feet, and he was glad that he had working clogs. Many people would be frightened of him, his bulk, his size, think that he was almost like some kind of monster. But he was inquisitive. When he was younger, he had hunted birds, but now he could not bear to see the sight of blood upon the ground. And if you were to tell him something, he would question it until his dying breath. He could see that someone had let some bulldogs out in this city. And now they were getting closer to these homeless young men. And he did not hesitate for a single heartbeat. He stood between these young men and this dog. Oh yes, this city had a grip on him. But he was not going to let anyone be treated badly. He could see that these young men, they were thin, wiry like his hair. And they were desperate for food. They were frightened. As they saw him coming closer to them, they were frightened, anxious. But it was his smile that let them know that this food was for them. He watched them. He watched them as they ate. No ceremony, no knives, forks, but fingers, dirty fingernails pushed inside of their mouths with the food. And in return, they gave him a postcard. He looked. Well, it's better than nothing. And I have helped them. But when he looked at it, there was a picture of a boat upon its back, and it had written down that he should go somewhere, almost as if it was some kind of a reading, some kind of fortune-telling. He followed them, and he saw that they went to a shelter, not a full home, but to a shelter. And as he got closer, he could see that they were not there. Their dirty, ragged clothes lay down upon the ground, but there was a magical aura to this place. Oh, he'd been in this city ever since he'd been a boy. And he looked and he wondered. As he walked down by the side of the river, he saw that the postcard was like a map. It directed him. It directed him to a quayside that not even he had been to. He looked. There was writing upon the card. It was advising him, not telling him what he should have to do, that he would have to go and get inside of a boat that was so flimsy. He thought himself, so big, how could this ever possibly support his weight? And he had never left the grip of the city. But he lay down in that boat. And as soon as his back touched the material, his eyes grew heavy and he fell to sleeping. For he did not know that that grip that the city had upon him was being broken by spirits, by harpies, these homeless young men who were waiting to see someone who would give them some food, show them some kindness. When he awoke, he found himself on an island in the middle of the sea. He felt as if he'd won a prize, no longer surrounded by noisy crowds of busy people, and he fell in love with this place. He was calm and he was content as the crystal clear ocean about him. Once adrenaline had overwhelmed him in his heart and in his veins, but now he could smile. Now he knew that he had found a home, away from this colony of squirming bees trapped in a city. Year 5, questions about Britain since 1948. Yes?
When if you're
Yes, my father was in the war. He fought and he travelled from, he fought in France and in Italy and in Egypt, and he travelled into Turkey, and he also came through Germany. So I've got a photograph of him when he was, I think he was about 22. He was about 22 when he first started in the war, which was about 1941. So he was there for 4 years. For him, it was a great experience because he'd lived in a small town in the northeast of England, and then he was transported to Italy, France, Germany, all these places. Boy here.
What type of clothes did you wear?
Well, I've got to say, you didn't have the same kind of choice as you've got now. Jeans were very expensive. So the only people who had jeans had like quite a bit of money because they weren't made in England. So people would have jeans that were imported from America. So they were quite expensive. We didn't tend to wear like T-shirts when I was little, when I was like 5, 6, 7 or 8, because they weren't really readily available. You would wear pretty much like now, like a short-sleeved shirt. Boys did not wear long trousers until they were about 11. So that was the way that it was. I didn't get my first pair of long trousers until 1964 when I moved up to the senior school. Yes?
What age did you start your like making up stories and music and stuff?
Well, what I used to do was, when I was at school, we used to have competitions in the school for writing competitions to see who could write the best story. So even when I was very little, I used to wind up sort of making prizes. So really, I've been telling and writing stories ever since I was very little. So that would make it, so like from 1958, I was making up stories. Girl here?
What did your house look like?
Well, we had 2 rooms in our house. There was a front room, and there was a back room, and then there was a place called the scullery. Now, these rooms were probably, you see the 2 oblongs on that half there? The 2 rooms were probably about that size. There was me, my father, my mother, and my sister. So my mother and father slept in the front room, which is closest to the street, and my sister and I lived in the room that was actually the kitchen. Okay, so we had 2 rooms, and that was it. Yes?
What was your favourite place that you've ever been to?
Well, we're talking about sort of like Britain since 1948. I've got to say I was very lucky. My mother and father couldn't afford a car. When I was about 6, a car came into our street. And we, as children, came in and thought, we've never seen a car before. So we all crowded round it, and it had the number plate, it was 0GR. And we all said, that must have come from London, because we couldn't believe that anybody in the northeast could have afforded a car. Our streets were cobblestones. It sounds primeval, doesn't it? And then they came and they covered it all over with tar, which meant that we could use our skates, you know, like roller skates. Because prior to that, you'd have to have, you could only skate on the pavement, and we would take turns. So my sister and I had 1 pair of skates, and I would get a turn on one skate, and she would use the other, and we'd go up and down the street in the gutter with 1 foot in the gutter and 1 on the pavement to go up and down.